Great, so transitioning away from disaster movies towards thinking about cooperation to end the night. And I'll be focusing on family, so after this is done, I'll send you home to your family. But I'm actually not going to talk about human families. I'm going to think about the ways that non-human animals cooperate. And I'm going to focus on the spotted hyenas, which are carnivores in Kenya, and also a number of different ground squirrel species. Okay? But before I get to the good, friendly kinds of behaviors, I'll start by, I'm an evolutionary biologist, and the theory of natural selection is often thought to favor the evolution of weaponry. So we have big claws and canines that have evolved. So there are many species that have these weapons. And there's this idea that natural selection should favor the evolution of behaviors that are purely selfish. That individuals should compete with each other for access to mates and to food. And so we see lots of examples of this. And so nature might be red in tooth and claw. Okay? So this is sort of the worldview. So as a biologist, when I look around, I see many different examples of cooperative behavior. So we have honeybees that have division of labor, and we have some individuals that will reproduce, others that don't reproduce at all. And this is common in many different societies in the natural world. And so why is this? So that's what makes me wake up in the morning. Okay, so why is there cooperation? And if it's this all-out battle, why the heck do we see it? And so for what I'm going to focus on tonight, I'm going to think about the role of family relationships. And so there's this guy, W.D. Hamilton, and about 50 years ago, he sort of revolutionized our way of thinking about the role of natural selection and its ability to favor cooperative behaviors. And he did this by thinking about this idea of inclusive fitness. So as an evolutionary biologist, when we think about natural selection, we think about it favoring behaviors that allow an individual to pass on their genes. So I do something, I get to have more babies, I reproduce more often, I'm passing on genes. And we can think of this as our direct personal reproduction. Okay? So before this idea of kin selection, we're basically stuck with thinking only what I do will influence my own direct outcomes. He came along and he added to this theory the idea that you might indirectly, through your relatives, so individuals that share the same genetic makeup as me or similar to me, may indirectly pass on my genes by their own reproduction. So if I help someone that shares genes with me, I might indirectly, through my kin or family relationship, so I'll use the term kin to mean genetic relatives. Okay? And it turns out that this concept works really well for a number of cooperatively breeding species. So in social insects, in cooperatively breeding birds, and even this naked mole rat. So here's the queen. The queen reproduces in this mammalian society, and she has workers that are sterile that help her, feed her. She lays around and they bring her tubers and things like this. So this idea has really revolutionized the way we've understood cooperative breeders, where family relationships are important for thinking about this. What I want to do is think about, beyond just this idea of sharing reproduction, how is it that maybe doing friendly social exchanges outside of reproduction might be favored through this idea? So how is it that if I do something helpful for you, if that might actually allow you to pass on more of your genes? So I'm basically going to hit this question. As an evolutionary biologist, I basically take multiple kinds of species, and I hit the question again and again to see if I converge on the same answer. So one species I'm going to think about are these spotted hyenas, and I'm going to think about, do free-living mammals basically bias affiliative? When I say affiliative, I mean friendly behavior. So doing something, nice interaction, maybe a hug or grooming your neighbor, removing some parasites, things like that. Do animals tend to bias this helpful behavior towards their relatives? And do they refrain from attacking or directing harmful behavior towards their relatives. So in other words, does kinship sort of protect you from being beaten up in a fight? Okay? So I'm going to ask this in hyenas, and then I'm going to switch gears, so a carnivore, and think about this in a rodent, first with yellow-bellied marmots, these rodents that are in Colorado, and then talk about this local research that we're doing in Contra Costa County on California ground squirrels, and thinking about their family structure and how it influences cooperation. So, first take you to Kenya, and so the work with spotted hyenas is here in the Masai Mara Reserve, and so this was my apartment, if you will. I lived in the Mara amongst hyenas and other animals that are living there, and so twice a day, every day, I go out in a field vehicle, and this is part of a long-term project, so we have almost 30 years of data now, and this is in collaboration with Kay Holkamp at Michigan State, but this long-term project, same spotted hyena groups watched every day, twice a day for 30 years. So long-term data to tell us about the evolution of cooperation. So these hyenas are more social than any other carnivore. They can live in groups up to 130, and they have female-dominated societies, which is very odd for mammals. Lemurs do this, but hyenas also do this. And they cooperate in hunting. They will capture prey together, but once they have this food, they compete intensely for access to it. And so you can see these hyenas are fighting over this piece of food, and I guess I should have brought a hyena skull. Maybe the next time I'll do that, because they can actually use this hyena feeding apparatus to break through a giraffe leg bone with their jaws. They're really strong. So don't mess with the hyena, and the females are the socially dominant ones in these societies. Okay? So carnivores in Kenya, and they live in these social groups. So I'm going to tell you about their family structure. These are their lineages, and they have multiple family groups. Okay, so this is one family group. This is the alpha matriline, so meaning this circle here is an adult female, and then her offspring are below her, and then her grand offspring, and so forth. So each one of these represents a family tree, and there are multiple family groups all within this big society of hyenas. So within a group, they're really closely related, and across groups, they have low levels of relatedness. So their genes are not shared very often.
Are the squares the males?
These are just the females, okay?
So what's square and
Oh, the squares. Okay, so those are, okay, so these are the females and their offspring before they've dispersed. So these are, within the social group, these are the individuals that are born into it. And I'll get to the males in just a moment, the ones that are adults. But these are the offspring that are born into the social group.
But still, what?
And the squares are the males, yes.
Oh, okay.
The natal, yes, yep. But they're not reproductive yet. Okay, good question. And okay, so within the family group, we're just going to focus on the females now, and so these are individual females. This is the comedian lineage, so I told you it's going to be happier than disaster movies, but those are actually really funny anyway. So Bracket Shoulder, Murphy, Seinfeld, Gilligan, these are all individual hyenas, and each of them are in a dominance pecking order, dominance rank order. So Bracket Shoulder is socially dominant to her daughter and to Seinfeld, and so forth down this dominance hierarchy. These are incredibly stable, and each of the family groups have their own ranking, and they're consistent across them. So the adult females grow up in their home group, and they have these ranks, and in order to actually reproduce, the males leave the group, and they have to come into a new one. So they're born in the group like we talked about, but to reproduce, the males come in all the way at the bottom of the dominance hierarchy. So that's how we get this female dominance. So when I study cooperation in these societies, the females are the most powerful social allies, so those are the ones I tend to focus on. And they're really interesting in the ways they cooperate. Okay, so to think about this first prediction from kin selection theory, there's this idea that females should, and so these are family groups that are shown here. There's this idea that family groups should cooperate more often than non-family groups. And this is a network, and each of these circles represents an individual hyena. And these colors, this is the alpha matriline represented with 1, it's the largest, and the matriline below it. And what you can see in this network, the lines are the strength of their connections, and the hyenas that are in these family groups associate most often. And this is really stable, these patterns, so there's not very much food, they have weaker connections, there's more food around, they have stronger connections overall, but we always see these family groups being structured, they're spending more time together. And then it goes down to low prey again. Okay? So they're preferring to be with their relatives, but in terms of cooperation, a really costly situation might be, here are 2 hyenas, they're in a fight. They're fighting each other, okay, so there's some fighting in here. So they're fighting, and there's this other hyena, and the question is, does hyena A, these are all adult females, does hyena A help hyena B? And if kinship matters, we predict that she is going to help B only if they're genetically related. However, we'd also expect that she'd be less likely to join a fight, help B win this fight, and direct aggression towards C if C and A are genetically related. We'd expect that that might protect her from aggression. So, to figure this out, you go to Kenya, you dart a hyena, you collect some blood, and you do some genetic analyses. Based on the outcome of the genetics, we assigned pairs of hyenas to different categories. And so some of these hyenas are close kin. These are mothers and daughters, or full sisters. They have the same mom and the same dad. And we compared the behavior of those pairs of hyenas to individuals that are half-sisters, aunts, nieces, grandmothers, and granddaughters, so distantly related kin. And then finally we had this group of unrelated individuals based on their genetics. So what did we find based on these fights? So there's a potential to join a fight. Do I help you? And do I help you because of your genetic relatedness to myself? So here are the data, and there are many aspects of this, but what I want you to focus on is the level of relatedness. So they're unrelated individuals, distantly related, and close kin, so the color darkness increases. So overall, across each of these different categories, there's an increasing, so this is support of beneficiaries per opportunity. This is the proportion of times I could help you that I do help you. So I could just stand by and not do anything. Turns out they do that a lot. But in all of these categories, we choose this one. Non-kin, they're not helping very often. They're helping distant kin more often, and they're helping close kin the most. So full sibs or full sisters or mothers and daughters are helping each other most often. And it turns out that they're also changing this behavior based on whether food is around. I already told you food's really important. So when food is immediately around, they're less likely to help anyone, but they're still more likely to help their kin than non-kin. And when food is not immediately available, well, they'll be a little more helpful. Okay, so they're helping kin most often, and they're doing it most often when there's not food around. Okay, so especially away from food. So here's a hyena feeding situation. They do hunt 85% of their own food, but when food is available, they'll hunt this big ungulate, like a wildebeest. They can do it by themselves. When that food is there, they can eat it really, really fast. So 1.5 kilos per minute just consuming this food. So it's really costly to spend time helping your sibling, helping your mother, when you could actually just be eating directly yourself. So that direct fitness benefit is really important. Okay, so those are hyenas doing that. The other thing we looked at is, so we know that they're helping kin more often than non-kin, but who are they attacking in these networks? So here we have some of the same players, so bracket shoulders here, Seinfeld, Murphy. The large circles, these are individuals that are high ranking, and who do they attack? It turns out they attack anyone that is below them in the dominance hierarchy. So they're very selfish in who they actually attack. They might be helping their relatives, but Murphy will attack Kipling and Jabberwocky and all the way down this network. They're not discriminating against who they attack on the basis of kinship. Take-home message, we help our kin, but we also compete directly for resources with them. So there's always conflict and cooperation here. Okay? So we're going to see this. This is true in hyenas. I'm going to bring this up in other examples as well. Helping my kin, but I'm also fighting with them. So it doesn't protect me from these fights, but it's allowing me to cooperate more often with them. Okay, so totally different species. These are yellow-bellied marmots, and so these are about cat-sized ground squirrels, and we study them up in the Rocky Mountains, so it looks like this in the summer, but you ski in the winter. And this is another long-term project. This one's been going on for about 55 years now, and Dan Blumstein is currently in charge of this project, and it's the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab in Gothic, Colorado. And so we have these large ground squirrels, and we paint with cattle dye on their backs, and you can see if you squint here, and maybe we could use some neural networks to figure out what this actually is, but this is a cherry on the back. Okay, so what we do is we observe their behavior, and we record who's playing with who's fighting with whom, and we know their genetic relationships to one another, and we try to figure out how kinship may or may not influence their behavior. Okay. So we go out and we observe them, and this is a marmot cake, in case you were wondering. I heart marmots, so maybe I'll bring that next time. Okay, so I'm going to show you a quick little video of some marmots playing, just because they're very cute. And so these are they're pretty big, actually. They are pups still, but these are pups on the large size. And you can see these are marks that we put on their backs so we can keep track of who's who. And the question here is, in this behavior, so they're going to sit here for a little while, but they do this playing, and so they'll be in close proximity with each other. And the question is, do they make active preferences about who their social partners are? Do they come in close contact? Do they do these play bouts more often per hours of watching them with their close relatives compared to their distant relatives? Okay? So similar kinds of questions, and I'm going to call these friendly interactions, and they're very cute, and they go on and on. They have these playbouts, and they change roles throughout them. And so what I want to know is if they're doing this play, this rough and tumble play, or other kinds of play, or they're doing greeting behavior, so these social interactions that we'll deem friendly, these positive interactions, are they biasing them towards their genetic relatives? So they might do greeting, they might do this playing, they can groom each other, and they also can choose to sit in close proximity, which for a marmot is a big deal because the threat of predation is always very strong, so being close to others is important. And so are they more likely to do these behaviors with close kin than distant kin? Okay. So here are some data. And what I want you to focus on here is these numbers they could be either negative or positive. And the idea here is that they are all positive. And what this means, I'm not expecting you to totally follow each of the statistics that went in here, but the idea is that these values, the rates at which they engage in those friendly behaviors, is positively related to how genetically related they are. The fact that this is a positive value means there's a positive correlation between how related they are based on genetics and how often they're doing these friendly things. And this is true at different life stages. So this is actually pretty surprising. It's happening starting at the pup stage. When they're born, that first year, they go back, they hibernate, they emerge as yearlings in their first full year after being born. They're also biasing friendly behavior towards their relatives, and then they're continuing to do it as adults. Okay? So we'd expect this positive correlation, but we look at this again with fights, and it turns out in the fighting context, they're actually biasing with also a positive correlation across all of these life stages again in the context of fighting. So it turns out they're fighting most often with their genetic relatives, just like the hyenas were. Okay? So they're biasing friendly behavior towards relatives, but not, they're directing competitive, nasty things also towards their kin. Okay? So, next I'm going to finish up by thinking about what we're doing most recently with California ground squirrels. So we're about 3 years in collecting field data on California ground squirrels. And so this is over at Briones Regional Park over in Contra Costa County. And we go out with students and we watch these little guys and we mark them. And we are asking questions about kinship. And so their behaviors are pretty similar to the marmots and they're closely related to them. They do affiliative behaviors, this nose-to-cheek interaction. They'll sit in body contact. They'll even do these friendly slaps and they'll play with each other as well. They do greeting behavior, which involves them putting their noses up close to another individual, and then more sitting. They do a lot of sitting. They're squirrels. And of course that's important for, they have a lot of predators, coyotes, and rattlesnakes that they deal with, and being in close proximity is a big deal. So we want to know how kinship is influencing and shaping these behaviors. And so we go out and we watch them, and what we're currently doing with the data is we are taking individual squirrels, and we can, just like with the hyenas, each of these squirrels will represent a particular node within the social network. And we want to know if their kinship, their genetic relationships, actually structure so these two squirrels are these orange circles and they might represent these ones. And the hypothesis is that they should be clustered with their genetic relatives. Okay, so we're doing it based on social interactions. We have a grant to record their space use. So we have these this monitoring system, which you put one of these in the squirrels' burrows. They live underground. They have a burrow that's their home, but we don't know really who lives in which one and who comes and goes at what time. So just like for a dog, where if you have a dog and it has a little microchip, it's about the size of a grain of rice, and we actually are implanting this under the skin, and every time the squirrel goes in and out, it's like scanning something at the grocery store. It records the time and who was going in and out. And we have all of that information, and we're building social networks based on that. The final part that we're working on is understanding the kinship, and the way that we do that is we put these traps out with some peanut butter and some seeds, and the squirrels go into them. They go into this handling bag, and we take a few hairs or a tissue sample, and then from these samples we extract DNA and collect the fur and take this DNA from these hair samples. And we can isolate the DNA, and eventually we'll build up one of these pedigrees very similarly as we did with the hyenas. So the take-home message is that family matters, and in the species that we've already worked on this for, basically kinship often seems to promote cooperation or at least friendly behaviors, but it often fails to protect individuals from fighting in the first place. So with that, I'm going to thank all the loads and loads of students that have helped with all of this work. Yay. And yay, couldn't have done any of it without them, and there are more that didn't do it a little bit. And funding, and I'll take questions if we have time.